Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Richmond College Prep School Children's Choir.
that passion. My goodness. Well, I hope your morning session was productive and illuminating. I know that today's keynote presentation and the workshops that are going to follow are going to be just as excellent. Before I go any further, though, I'd like to introduce a few people that are in the audience today to make sure that we acknowledge their presence. Satinder Mali from the office of Senator Mark Desagne is here. Jill Merrick from Assemblywoman Nancy Skinner's office is here. I'll be introducing the Assemblywoman in just a second. Latresa Alford from office of Congressman George Miller is here, I heard. Where is she? And Antonio Medrano, a board of trustee for the Richmond. I keep calling it Richmond. It's the West County Unified School District. Used to be Richmond about it. And Elaine Merriweather, who's also a board member from the West County Unified School District, is here. And Tom Leatherman from the National Park Service, the National Park Superintendent is here. There he is. Hi, Tom. And I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce the board members that are here from the Richmond Community Foundation. Josh Ginzer is here. There's Josh. And we have Janet Spears, who's a former board member, but she's the Chief Operation Officer for the East Bay Community Foundation. Janet, where are you? There you are. Thank you. Also, I wanted to make sure that we highlight once again our sponsors, and in your program you will see that we had some corporate sponsors that have been very, very generous. And first and foremost, we want to thank Chevron for its sponsorship. We are the presenting sponsor for the event today. Our platinum sponsor is Kaiser Permanente. PG&E, I believe we have Representative Roxanne Cruz from PG&E that's here today. And the East Bay Community Foundation, the California Endowment. Comcast is... Anyone here from Comcast? Comcast sponsored our reception last evening, and we just want to say thank you for sponsoring that reception. We have LISC also as a silver sponsor, and the City of Richmond is a silver sponsor too. Then we have the supporting sponsors. I won't read all of their names, but they're there on the back of the program. Let's give all of our sponsors a round of applause. Assemblywoman Nancy Skinner has been a stalwart in the Assembly. She has visited, I know personally, Contra Costa College on several occasions, sharing with us the happenings in Sacramento. And as a supporter of education, she has not relented one bit. She sees that it's going to be important for education to maintain its share of the budget, and she works hard, diligently, trying to support all that we are trying to do here as educators. But personally, I just want to say this. Yeah, she's a fun-loving person, too. I didn't know that she's a singer. I heard her singing out there. Maybe we should ask her to come up and sing. No, I'm just joking. So, without any further ado, let's welcome Assemblywoman Nancy Skinner.
Thank you very much, McKinley. I'm so glad that after your many years of service to our Contra Costa Community College that you're also still, as I knew you would be, stalwart for the community and serving on the board here of the Richmond Community Foundation. Yes, I do like to sing, and sometimes it's hard to sing joyfully with the kind of budgetary situation that our state is in, which of course affects our schools, affects our communities, affects all of us. But that's not why I'm standing here today. I think it's worth it for us to give another round of applause for that incredible choir from Richmond College Prep. And yes, I do know that beautiful song, Hallelujah, by Leonard Cohen. so I was very happy to hear it. And I want to thank the Richmond Community Foundation for bringing everyone together on this very, very important subject of education, who will lead. And you're here, so you know the value and the importance of it, but California has the vibrant economy that it does. And as much as we're in a really difficult circumstance, the world is. The globe is in a recession. And yet still, on any given day, California is in the top 10 global economies. So even with the bad news, we are a vibrant economy. Why? We are a vibrant economy because Californians invested in education. And we have to return to that. We have been disinvesting. And you can look at me as a legislator and you can say, well, why not? Why, legislator? Why are you not investing more? Well, it takes more than me. It takes the entire state. It takes every one of us. And sadly, starting with Prop 13 and many other choices that we've made, we didn't necessarily think about it or realize it, but we disinvested in education because we pulled back on our tax revenues to the state of California. And when you do that, 50% of California's general fund goes to K through 12 education. So we have to remind ourselves, and we have to really engage in that. And if we want leadership in education again, and quality education, yes, there's many things that we can do internally to the administration of our schools, to the quality of the classroom, but we have to refund it. We have to bring more funds in. And I'll fight that battle in Sacramento, but we also need it in every community, all up and down the state, and with every individual, for all of us to realize that we are not yet paying our fair share to give quality education. But I want to introduce the panel today. We are so fortunate to have a wonderful set of professionals and experts. We have Dr. Michael Kirst, who is currently the president of our State Board of Education. He was appointed by the governor last year, and he served previously on the Board of Education. So he brings not only his experience as an academic and in this field of education, but also his past service on the Board of Education. His focus academically has been education policy, and he has looked and published books on school finance issues, on college preparation, on college success. Among his many books are The Political Dynamics of American Education and a book called From High School to College. We also have on the panel Chris Cabaldon. Chris Cabaldon is a principal with the firm Capital Impact. He, for many years, served as the chief consultant to the State Assembly's Policy Committee on Higher Ed. He was served as the vice chancellor of our state community college system, and he also serves in local government as the mayor of West Sacramento. So he brings many perspectives to the table. And Jonathan Kaplan is with our California Budget Project. And for those of you who really want to understand in much better detail than any of the blogs, websites, or media gives you, if you want to understand the situation of California's revenues and California's budget, go to the California Budget Project website. It gives you great insight into how various corporate tax cuts have affected our revenues today, how the changes in Prop 13 affected our current, still today, our current budgetary situation, or even the elimination of the vehicle license fee. So the California Budget Project is a great resource and gives you the real facts and not just the things that the newspapers like to tout. Jonathan Kaplan is a senior analyst there. His focus is in education, and he was a former public school teacher in Martinez. So I welcome Dr. Kirst, Chris Cabaldon, and Jonathan Kaplan, who will be in conversation in this panel.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to start off today, thanks for that introduction, Assemblywoman Skinner. I'm going to try to set the stage a little bit for why it is that California's public schools seem to be at the center of the state's budget crises. And in my office, we've sort of gotten to the point now where we're like, well, when does a budget crisis end up, if it's going on for 4, 5, 7, 10 years, when is it no longer a crisis and just sort of where we are? But before I do that, let me just give you a short bit more than Assemblywoman Skinner talked about. The Budget Project has been around since 1995. We are an independent nonprofit located in Sacramento where we focus on analyzing state budget issues from the perspective of middle and low-income Californians. And as she stated, I am the person who focuses on education issues at the Budget Project, both K-12 and higher education. And if you want to get in touch with me after this presentation, you can find me through the website, which is on your tables there, and I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards about our work and how we might be able to help you. But before we start, what I'd like to do, let's see where we're at. I'm going to just do a quick quiz here because I was a high school teacher. By the way, I was a teacher in Martinez at Alhambra High School, not too far down the road, not before I became a budget analyst. And so when I get in front of groups of people, I put my teacher hat on and try to get you all a little bit involved. So the first question I'd like to ask you, just think to yourselves a moment, is the first question up here, which is how much would you say you know about how your state and local government spends and raises money? Do you think you know a lot about that? Some, very little, or nothing? That's question number one. And question number two, I'd like to ask you, which of the following represents the largest share of state spending in the budget? Would you say that's Health and Human Services, Prisons and Corrections, K-12 education, or higher education? Before you talk to somebody, just think to yourself for a moment what you think about those two questions. Now what I'd like you to do is turn to somebody next to you and tell them what you think about either of those two questions. And I'm going to come back to you in about 30 seconds or so, but talk to somebody next to you for a moment. Okay, I'm going to pull you back. So just as a show of hands, the answers to the first question, I know it feels like sometimes putting people on the spot, but the idea here is just to try to get a little bit of give and take. How many of you said you knew some or a lot about state budget and local budget issues? Okay. How many would you say you know very little or nothing? Okay, good. All right. How about the second question? Assemblywoman Skinner stole my thunder a little bit here, but had you not heard her give you the answer to the question, how many of you would you have said that Health and Human Services is the largest share of state spending in the budget? How about Prisons and Corrections? K-12 education? Higher education? Okay, good. This is a pie chart that shows you how state general fund spending breaks down in the state budget. And what I'm going to do is show you a little bit about where state dollars come from, where they go. As you'll notice, the top pie slice in this chart shows you that K-12 education is the largest portion of state spending in our budget. It is over 40% of state budget spending. It has been that way for quite some time. Next after that is Health and Human Services. That's the bottom pie slice on this chart. That is about roughly a quarter of general fund spending, and that's mostly in the Medi-Cal and CalWORKs programs. After that is higher education. That's the UC and CSU system, as well as the California community colleges at roughly 10 cents on the dollar. And then after that last is prisons and corrections. Now, what's interesting about this is that you generally mimic more or less what it is that the state's public answered as relates to those first questions I raised for you. And those questions are raised in a Public Policy Institute of California poll every year. They publish those results roughly in January of every year. And in those results, what we find is that about half of the public thinks they know some or a lot about the state budget, but only 1 in 6 Californians can name K-12 education as the largest share of state spending in our budget. And about half think that it's prisons and corrections, which is more or less sort of where you all were at, right? So there's a big disconnect, even for people who are very interested in issues around public policy, who care a lot about what's going on in schools in our state. Many people don't really understand some of the basics about how the state budget operates. Now, in addition to how state spending works, I'm going to show you just the second slide, which shows that state dollars account for more than half of all the dollars that show up at school doors across this state. So half of all dollars half of all school dollars come from the state's general fund, and more than half, the largest share of state spending goes to schools. In there is exactly why state schools are at the center of the state's budget crisis. The reason is California spends the largest share of its general fund dollar on schools, and schools depend on the largest share of their dollars from the state. So what happened most recently is that we had what was called the Great Recession. This was a huge drop-off in revenues in this state. In fact, it was the largest drop-off since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Between 2007 and 2011, in 2007, the projections were we would have $47 billion more in state revenue than we do this year. That's from the Legislative Analyst's Office projections in 2007. A $47 billion difference between where we thought we would be in November of 2007 versus where we are today. To give you a sense of what that means, $47 billion would equal the entire Health and Human Services budget, higher education, corrections, and resources and environmental protection combined. So what we saw was a massive drop-off in revenue. And as a result, we saw schools at the center of that drop-off in spending. So schools ended up being at the center of that budget crisis. That was about $8.3 billion less in general fund spending on schools in 2011-12 than was spent in 2007-8. That's roughly half of the overall reduction in general fund spending across the state. So that schools are really at the center of the budget crisis as it stands now, and as the governor pointed out on Monday in the May revise, when you need to cut spending, you go to where the spending is, and that's where schools are. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today as well about how schools get their dollars. Schools get their dollars in two ways. They either get unrestricted dollars or restricted dollars. Very simple. The unrestricted dollars are the largest portion of the dollars that schools receive, and they're often the ones that are getting hit, as well as also restricted dollars. Those restricted dollars are what are called categorical dollars in state budget land. Those categorical dollars have also been slashed over the course of the last 5 years. Now, on the spending side, how do schools spend their dollars? Schools spend their dollars mostly on staff salaries and benefits. 4/5 of all school spending goes to the salaries and benefits of staff. About 40% of it to teacher salaries, about 25% to other staff salaries, and about 1 out of every $5 to benefits. The rest is taken up by operating schools, as well as also books and supplies. So, what has the budget crisis meant for schools? Well, schools, many of you in the communities that are at sort of the center of what's going on with the budget crisis know this better than I. But to close repeated budget gaps, schools across the state have made, the state has made deep cuts to schools' general purpose dollars, their earmarked dollars, and the cuts to state education spending has led the majority of school districts in this state to increase class sizes or to shorten their school years. Moreover, the number of teachers in this state has declined by over 10%. That's teaching positions statewide have gone down over 10%. In Alameda County, I believe it's more than 14% in the last 5 years. And so what that means is that California, which has always ranked for a period of time here at the low ends of students per teacher, has now fallen to the lowest point where we've been in a long time. And we now have the highest number of students per teacher in the nation. And it's 50% larger than the national average. So when you're looking at what the impacts are on schools, you're seeing larger class sizes, shortened school years, and significant impacts on what's happening in students' lives. So what's the moral of that story? California schools need more resources. California schools have seen large reductions to their resources over the last 5 years. And in order California schools also have spent substantially less per student than schools across the country. And they have more students per staff than other parts of the country. State budget shortfalls will be projected for the upcoming several years, even if we get a tax measure passed this November. Unless there are spending cuts at the state capitol, shortfalls are expected for a period of time more. And California schools will likely fall further behind if that's the case. So I'm going to leave that and hope that was a primer for you, and then we'll take questions later.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the California State Board of Education, and the prior talk by Jonathan Kaplan really covered a lot of some of the status figures that I was going to give, and that's good because then I will be able to move more directly through to talk a little bit more about what we can do about this and less about what our situation is. So California students are really quite diverse, as you know. We have 6.2 million students in California. 52% are Hispanic, and that is the main group growing. The African American population in schools is 6.5%, and it's the white population is 30%, and the balance are Asian students. We have 25% of our students in California cannot function in English in the classroom effectively, and so they're called English limited students. There are 1.6 million of those. So it is really quite a diverse and somewhat challenging student body for the state. Now you'll hear various numbers about how much we spend and our expenditures and things of that sort. But if you adjust for California for the costs nationally, and it costs more to run a school in California than it does in Arkansas, then California drops to about 45th in spending, based on the high cost of housing and living here in that regard. The state ratio of total school staff per 1,000 students, this is all kinds of staff. Janitors, crossing guards, parent-teacher aides, administrative assistants, guidance counselors, librarians, we're 50, and we're 72% of the national average. So we just don't have a lot of adults, period, of any type around schools at this point in our situation. So a better financial base is a top priority. Now, the November initiative would raise considerable amounts of money for schools, but it is a temporary tax, if it passes, which would expire in 7 years. And it's based on current sales taxes and on the raise in the income tax, heavily among the higher income brackets. So this initiative will stop further cuts. It'll increase spending somewhat. But where Jonathan left you was we need revenue. Where are we going to get the revenue beyond, hitting the traditional tax bases? And one area that's been difficult for us to get the revenue from is property tax. And that is regulated under Proposition 13, a constitutional amendment. You'd have to amend the Constitution to do much with it. No initiative has ever been tried since Proposition 13 passed in 1978 because there's no poll that shows it would pass. So the latest idea on the table is that we would expand our tax base to services. Right now, if you buy a television, you pay a sales tax. If you have somebody come over and hook you up or fix your television, that's a service. There's no sales tax. When you go into a shopping mall and you buy a pair of pants, there's sales tax. But if you go to a tanning salon, that's a service, and there's no sales tax. So what I think one of the things we need to consider after the initiative, and that hopefully passes, is extending the base of the sales tax to services, particularly the services used by more high-income groups. And you can do it that way. And that, I think, is one of the opportunities for revenue. But in the past, the state has relied on a boom-bust thing of we go up and we go down, and every time we go down, we seem to lately be going down harder than we go up in terms of our economic growth. So I think that's the revenue picture is important. Now, when you look at the test scores, you see these are on our California standards tests in 8th grade. And you see a tale of two ways of looking at it. On the one hand, we've made substantial progress in proficiency among all three groups listed in the overhead. And actually, if you look back at 203, our test scores, if you took a distribution like that, and that's your bell-shaped curve, it sort of moved over to here now. We've moved everything up. So actually, the schools have become more efficient. We've been cutting the budget, as Jonathan indicated, and increasing our test scores on what we're driving the system with. On the other hand, if you look at the end of that slide, you see still there's an achievement gap between African American, Hispanic, and white students. And so we're part of the way there, but we're really have to move forward in a more dramatic way. Okay, now if you look at our national assessment results, we are among the 5 lowest. This is called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And that's in part because the national test is not aligned well with our test, so we're going up on our test, and that will change as we bring in the Common Core curriculum, and I'll talk about that. And finally, a note about higher education graduates. Our 4-year colleges are in the top 10 to 20 in the country in producing graduates after 6 years. However, our community colleges, where over 60% of the students go, are really drag the state down in the sense that the community college completion rates are really low, and I'm including their certificates and associate's degrees as well as transfer. So clearly we need to be focusing on improving the transition from high school to college, and now let me talk about some places we're going. Okay, priorities for California education. Simplify education funding. There are about 15 to 20 people in Sacramento who understand the school finance system. It's the most complex, convoluted thing you've ever seen. It's filled with mandates and special provisions and historical artifacts, and it sort of grew like a side of a mountain without any rational plan. We have 62 categorical programs that guide state money to specific purposes. 62. No other state in the country has so much interference in how locals spend their money. And the last time the legislature had any money in 2006, they created 22 new categorical programs. And so it's very complex. Now, let me tell you about the proposal the governor made in his May revise this Monday. It's called a weighted pupil formula, which adjusts for pupil needs throughout the state. First of all, we take most all of the 62 categories and dump them into a pot of money, remove other mandates that are not the money, and send the pot of money out to the school districts with much more flexibility and with a transparency system that would record whether the money is getting to the pupils. Now, what's a weighted pupil? The quote, average pupil gets a certain amount, a base amount, and then you get more money for every low-income pupil you have who qualifies for free lunch, or an English learner pupil who is not in that low-income category. So it's a base amount, low-income, non-duplicated count English learners. If this would pass, it would dump over the next 7 years a very significant increase into the West Contra Costa County schools, also into Oakland, and it would, but not much money would go to Walnut Creek, for example. Not as much money would go to Walnut Creek. So this is a new finance concept currently before the legislature, and it has more promise than any major legislative thing I can think of for the West Contra Costa County schools. Essentially, when you take the current system and you go through all these formulas and categorical programs and historical artifacts, it ends up being close to a flat grant. So West Contra Costa County gets roughly the same amount of money per pupil as does Walnut Creek from the state. So this would radically change it to adjust for pupil needs. Now, the other thing that's on the horizon is something called the Common Core curriculum. 46 states have adopted a new curriculum that will be phased in more heavily in 2014, 2015, but is already being phased in across the country. I never thought I'd see 46 states agree on a curriculum. And the theme of it was, in terms of the content standards and what students need to do, fewer, deeper, better. Our current standards are very wide, very hard to teach, all of it, impossible in many cases. They're not very deep. We often repeat the same things in different grades. It's not as well sequenced in mathematics as it needs to be, and it doesn't really encourage the kind of learning you need for college and career-ready standards. So we're redoing everything. We're redoing our curricular frameworks for teaching. We're redoing our instructional materials. Textbooks will be less and less used. More will be digital. We're reviewing our assessment system. We've joined with 25 other states, one of the 2 national assessment systems called a Smarter Balanced Assessment. It'll be a computer adaptive assessment where students will, as they answer questions correctly or incorrectly, be moved up and down by a computer. They'll take it on the computer. We're also then going to redo the accountability system to put more weight on the other subjects in addition to English language arts and math, and revise that. So the multiple choice closed-end testing you've seen will not be around for much longer. So we will also be looking at the career and technical ed standards and at pathways for students that give them more clear guidance for career and technical education. We're going to align the English language learner standards with Common Core and the new assessments that I mentioned. We've had a separate English learner standards that are part standards, partly how to teach. They haven't been well integrated sometimes into the regular curriculum. So it's coming together, but of course you need extra kinds of teaching interventions for English learners. That will be included, but it'll be one system rather than scattered all over. More revamping of assessments and cutting tests. We test a lot in the senior high schools, biology, chemistry, world history. These are old-fashioned multiple choice tests. The students know they don't count for college or on their grades, so they blow them off. In some cases, it's a lot easier to kid the 3rd to 8th graders that the test is, essential, but the high schoolers, they've caught on. So we're looking at cutting a number of those for individual students and diversifying the state accountability measures. Okay, we're also on teacher learning. This is for new teacher preparation. The California Teacher Commission, CTC, will be ramping up a lot their assessment in much more depth and uniform implementation. They have an assessment at the end of teacher preparation. I spoke to the Stanford students yesterday, and they had just taken this. This is really an exam as to whether you can teach at the end and whether you have the content to teach. That's being revised and made more standardized and strengthened. There's also a bill in the teacher evaluation in the legislature, but I don't expect that to pass this year. I'll mention the 2 other things here. Supporting innovation, some of that is in charter schools, but ensure accountability for improved student outcomes. What we're trying to do with charter schools is close down the ones that aren't doing well and encouraging opening the ones that will do well or are already doing well. But the charter movement is still expanding in California despite the very low per pupil expenditure we have, and it's doing some innovative things that add to the innovation mix of the traditional schools. Lastly, and this is the one that I have the least to say on, facilitate and support the best uses of technology. I've studied educational reform history. Radio was to change education. Television was to change education. This is the everyday delivery in the classroom. The PC, the personal computer, was supposed to change the classroom, and then handheld computers were supposed to be the final thing. You know, all the rest didn't do it, but that would do it. But nothing much has happened. When I left the state board in 1982, we felt really good. We had 3 computers in the back of most of the classrooms. I came back in 2010 and went out, 3 computers in the back of most classrooms. We just haven't figured this out at all. And a lot of what the research and products are not a bigger solution of state policy that I work on, but they're how to teach this unit with a new game or something. So there's still not enough there. So we are working on some kind of statewide initiative, but that is a work in progress. And indeed, nobody has given me something that I could stand before you today and say, this is what we need to do. So that gives you an overview of where we are and some of the ways that we're trying to go. And now I'll turn it over to Christopher, who will finish up on our dynamic trio.
Because my role here is to be a little provocative and to create some grease in the conversation. And I think one useful thing, though, to think about is maybe there aren't 12 signs of different kinds of people, like the zodiac, in terms of how we perceive how to fix education or how to deal with education. But it is useful, I think, sometimes to be explicit with ourselves about what kind of education advocate we are, because there are some different species. There are the accountability people, right, whose essential worldview is, let's set high standards, have good assessments of those, and by enforcing those or publicizing those, that will cause people, create incentives for people to change their behaviors and their systems in order to produce better achievement. There are I don't want to hear about any solutions, we just need more money for schools, and we should cut prisons, and any other solution is immoral, and that's the end of that conversation. So there's more money from somewhere at some point in the future, and until then, I'm not going to do anything. There's that camp of folks. There are what you might call the categorical species, which, they go out and they see a really great program, where people who are third graders who are exposed to snowboarding for a summer, turns out they do really well in math the following fall, and so they come out and say everyone should be doing snowboarding in third grade. And we ought to have a state program that provides snowboards and bindings to every third grader in California. Then there's the reform folks who say if we granted tenure after 21 months instead of 18 months, then that will change everything. Or if every school were to put a garden in the center of its campus, then that will change achievement with one stroke of one pen. And I've lived in all those worlds. I don't want to talk about anything more money. I've been talked about the accountability stuff. I've talked about my community gardens, whatever it is. We've all been in those places, but it is useful to think about it because of the complexity that Jonathan talked about in school finance. None of us feel, and we're right, that we can get a grasp around the whole thing. This is not one of those issues like getting to the moon, where we think some expert is going to solve it for us if they just knew enough. We've been at this, together for 80, 90, 100 years. We might be slightly closer than half of you to getting to the solution, but we're probably slightly farther than the other half of you, despite all of that. Knowing much, much more about the system doesn't get you closer to the solution. But being honest with yourself about what your policy framework is, what your theory of change might be, and what the end goal is really all about. What I think is really interesting about what the governor has proposed on the weighted pupil formula piece is it is a fundamental change, and it sort of crosses many, many of those different types of people. It doesn't quite get to the accountability only people or to the more revenue only folks. But it does touch in every one of those other areas, because it's essentially, as Mike said, it's a fourth way, saying, look, the state doesn't know all those things. Snowboarding doesn't turn out to be that great of a solution in Chula Vista or El Cerrito as well as it did in South Lake Tahoe. So maybe the state shouldn't be mandating that. Or with climate change, it turns out there's a lot less snowpack every year, and so even with snowboards and bindings, fewer and fewer third graders can have access to snow. But the legislature's ability to know everything with certainty forever and put it in a program or in a mandate is pretty limited. And maybe we've overstated the competence of our state government to be able to make those decisions. And so to pull back and say, we don't know all the answers. In fact, we probably don't even know half of them. And we have a pretty mediocre track record at the state level of accomplishing these things. What if we were to give local communities more control to make some of those choices, make their own mistakes to be sure, but also find solutions that work in their own communities and marry it with an accountability system that is about more than one or two tests. And that is an assessment that's more than multiple choice and all of that, but also covers a broader range of skills and competencies than we have traditionally assessed, so that we could have a more robust measure of, okay, West Contra Costa, here's more money because your students have greater levels of need than Walnut Creek, and this is the Northern California Summit, so there might be some folks from Walnut Creek here, sorry. You would still get more money under this plan, but West Contra Costa would get even more. So West Contra Costa, here's a larger amount of money, here's a much larger degree of flexibility for your community to figure out how to invest those resources in ways that pay off for West Contra Costa students. And then the third piece is, and here is a more robust, more comprehensive system of assessments and accountability that are a marker for you and for the public of the state, because all of California cares about the success of students in West Contra Costa, that those three elements together, maybe they are, in combination provide not the answer, but a better tool for the whole set of answers to come into play, so that the accountability folks, the school garden folks, the more money folks can all have a piece of the action, and we can start to see in local communities one by one. Maybe it is that a school garden with more money does pay off, but what will happen is it will know. The local school, the parents will know, parent activists, civil rights groups, school board members will be able to say that's working or it's not working. Not we're going to keep doing it next year because the state told us to, or because a really great legislator in 1967 came up with this idea and we're going to be doing it for the rest of our lives. But we're going to keep doing it because it's working, or we're not going to keep doing it because it's not working, and here's another path. So it's a challenge. The politics of this issue in particular, I'm picking on this one because it's such a central part of this year's budget proposal, as opposed to many of the other issues that Dr. Kirst mentioned, is that this idea of the weighted pupil formula has had broad support for a long time. A lot of kinds of folks in this room, whether it's teachers or principals and school boards, foundations and think tanks and professors. It's been researched. Mike said it's a new proposal. It is a new proposal, but the actual idea and the concept has been around forever, researched by some people to death. And has had a lot of experimentation in districts. So we know what it is, but it's been advanced by really thoughtful people. And the problem with that in politics is that really thoughtful people start to obsess about the details. And so if you paid attention to this issue at all, since the governor proposed, let's spend more money on kids who need it and give communities the flexibility to do it in January, the immediate answer from even folks who should be like, that's a terrific idea. That's what we need for West Contra Costa. That's what I need in my own community in West Sacramento back home, is instead we're thinking, oh, well, that's 96% right. But should the weight for the English language learner student be 37% or 34%? And should the accounting form that I report back to the state, should that be part of the student accountability report card, or should it be part of my fiscal report under Prop 98? We're all trying to get obsessed about the details, and while that's happening, the forces of inertia are prevailing and saying, well, let's just not make any change at all. It's just too complicated. Let's just keep the completely unequitable, unfair, unjust, immoral distribution of resources that we have today, and let's keep this radical state control over every little thing that schools do. Let's keep that in place because we can't figure out these little tiny details on the weighted pupil formula. So Mike presented the basics of the plan, but I think we need to all sort of think about our own role in advancing these kinds of issues in the way that a political discourse at the state level happens. And too many of us have been too thoughtful to roll up our sleeves and say, let's get in a fight, Walnut Creek. We need to make this thing happen. And it won't until we do.
Okay. Is that right? So I'm wondering, Christopher, you're a skilled politician up there and been around the legislature a long time. What do you see the legislative initiatives looking like for this year?
Well, last year the legislature's one of the biggest initiatives was in the area of redesigning the academic performance index. Senator Steinberg, the president of the Senate, had a proposal that made it to the governor, which was vetoed, but raises this question, and it was sort of one stream of what's already occurring in many venues. And as Dr. Kirsch said, the work on the Common Core and the rebuilding of the assessments in a more general sense as a part of that. The increasing work, and I know Dave Yanofsky from Connect Ed is going to be doing a session later on linked learning, but around a better integration of college and career readiness nationally and in California. That is a major policy initiative that's occurring in California as well. All of that trying to come together. And that proposal last year wasn't successful, but it raised all the right issues that remain part of the policy debate. And they become really critical because of the weighted pupil formula proposal. If you say we're going to give broad flexibility to local communities, I mean, most school boards have the right intentions and they have the good systems of policy making and great principals and superintendents and teachers and classified staff and parents engaged to get it right. But we got a lot of school districts in California, and some of them don't. Right? Some of them aren't at 100% of great capacity, and others do make missteps, and they need warning systems that tell them that they are getting it right or getting it wrong, or that someone else is getting it better than they are. And our current systems don't do that. And so there is this interest in the legislature from last year that continues, and I think it is one of the key issues of the weighted pupil formulas. How do we get that part right? Not how do we get 100% right, because I don't know what that is, and I'm sure even Dr. Kirst, after all this time working on these issues, there is no one absolutely correct assessment of college and career readiness across every subject and every discipline that accounts for project-based learning and collaboration and 21st century skills and English and math and college readiness. There's no perfect, but we know what we have today is pretty darn imperfect. And so the legislature's attention around thinking, how does the Academic Performance Index and NCLB and the Common Core and the new assessments from Smarter Balance, how does that work together with the weighted pupil formula to create an accountability system that advances those, that is at least better than what we're doing today at advancing those objectives?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that we're struggling with, and I know there's some people here that have led sessions on this, is what about students who are really less oriented around four-year colleges and want a more of a strong career tech preparation program, and then a continuation of that either in a community college or in some kind of private college, post-secondary institution. How do we design those programs in the high school, given how little money we have? It's really difficult. People keep saying, well, a lot of our, to me and a state board, some of our dropout period is because students want more applied work. They don't want just courses that are all cerebral and that sort of thing. And it's really been difficult to figure out how to do that and afford it in this context. Vocational education should have disappeared, and it did, but we never put much back in its place other than the regional occupation programs and centers that go back to the 1970s and 1980s in their formation. So this is an area that it would be interesting for your groups to talk about, and we're certainly open to suggestions on how to do this and meet this sort of interest of these pupils. And how do you build any depth in the high school in a career occupational area? Or do you just try introductory things that say, here's all the jobs in health, from MD down to somebody who's working at a very basic level in a hospital, and there's all these jobs in between. How do we get some students will be interested in the ones in the middle? And right now, other than trying to do it in community college, we don't have much going in the high schools to bring that about. And that's not part really of Common Core. Common Core, although it says, and it is career ready, it's career ready for basically jobs that require some pretty significant post-secondary education.
Yeah, I think that's right. On the career readiness side, use the term in a generic sense nationally and here, when it really means several different things. I mean, there's a couple of different dimensions to it. One is, do you have the skills for a particular industry or sector, which is that's one dimension of career readiness. The other is the sort of 21st century skills. Do you show up on time? Do you know how to collaborate? Those sorts of skills. And then the third is kind of the career navigation skills, for lack of a better term. Do you know what the workforce is? Do you know how to get a job? Those sorts of things. And they're all career readiness, but they're different, and they're not measured. None of them are together measured in any particular way. I actually think that it's useful to not think about the career side mainly as a modernized CTE and voc ed curriculum. That it's also the students who have the highest post-secondary academic aspirations who can and do benefit from well-designed, fully integrated career and academic programs. And Contra Costa, both West and East, are really at the center of this statewide, and this whole linked learning work to try to integrate that so that it's not just that there is a high-quality CTE track and a high-quality college prep track, but that they're fully integrated at the instructional level. So the English teacher knows on Thursday that the construction class is going to be focused on a particular topic, and he or she can incorporates that into the writing assignment, and vice versa. The carpentry class instructor knows that in geometry they're covering the Pythagorean theorem that week and can incorporate it. And so it's expensive partly because our systems aren't designed for that. So the amount of collaboration and design that is necessary to accomplish that sort of integration is more costly. It pays off because both for the career student gets interested in geometry and English in ways that he or she might not have been, but also for the student that was interested in geometry, who might have been weak on English or was interested in geometry only in the theoreticals. It makes it relevant, and the level of engagement goes way high. So I think that's the future, figuring out how to drive the cost down. Our approach up to this point has been categorical, and it's been successful. The California Partnership Academies are an extremely successful model, but they're not scalable in the sense that we could just do it statewide because they do cost more money. What we've got to do is a better job in both the teacher preparation and professional development side, and in the development of real curriculum. So you've got CTE courses that are eligible, A to G eligible for UC and CSU admission. So you're not having to take both a great CTE curriculum and a college prep curriculum and somehow, fit that all into one day, but they're fully integrated but ready to go, so that each teacher doesn't have to design it over and over and over again, because that's where it starts to get costly. So to me, it's about structural, institutional design of linked learning and high quality career and college readiness together to deal with the cost issues in the long run.
Why don't we take some questions, and then we'll have more dialogue.
Thank you for your presentation. It is really informative, and it has a lot of insight to what's going on with our schools. My name is Latrice Alford, and I'm with Congressman George Miller's office. And earlier today, I was attending a meeting with administrators and school board and teachers in the Vallejo Unified School District. And one interesting thing they did was today, we also met with comedian Bill Cosby. Vallejo has a lot of different problems with their school district, more so than West County, believe it or not. They were in receivership, as you may know. They had problems financially, problems in regards to test scores, and then also they have one of the highest dropout rates in the Bay Area. So they met with Bill Cosby today, and he was speaking to them about probably supporting some of the programs that Vallejo has, and particularly Vallejo schools. And so what they're trying to do is reach out to him, because as you know, he's known for giving money to historically black colleges, building buildings on campuses and supporting different programs. And so my question to you is, to the panel is, do you think that might be the way of the future for public education, is to seek monies from outside funders and funders such as Bill Cosby and other star worthy people and bring attention to what's going on in the schools and partner with them on different programs. I know here in West County, our schools, our district is partnered with Chevron on a lot of different opportunities to support different programs. So what are your thoughts in regards to bringing in outside high-profile people?
I think that's a good one, Jonathan.
So, you know, it's interesting. I carpool with a member of the Berkeley School Board fairly often, and we were just talking about this concept. You know, that public higher education institutions were late to the game in terms of endowments in a certain way to sort of kind of find private dollars to help fund what was going on in the public institutions. And you know, we were talking about programs in public schools and whether or not that was sort of the way that we were heading. And in fact, that may be the case. I would argue that there's some significant equity issues and concerns that would be within such, you know, a move. Not that it's not something that we may be forced towards or something that actually could occur. But, you know, the foundation of California's education finance system is built on a court case called Serrano, which is basically about a case that you know, prior to Prop 13 and prior to the institution of the state's education finance system in the early 1970s, state schools were financed mostly from local property tax revenues, and so there was inequities based on that. One would argue that we haven't moved very far enough in terms of dealing with equity issues as a result of the system that was created after that. But I would have concerns about equity issues where you're dependent on individuals, whether they be well-known and wealthy, or for that matter, what's going on currently, which is that education foundations across this state and in many communities, you know, we all hear, and I'm sure many of us are even hit up for, you know, donations to your local education foundation as sort of a, you know, an expected thing to be able to, you know, for the school district to be able to provide the services that I think we would all hope all school districts in this state would be able to provide. So while it may be a means to stop gapping the budget issues that we're confronted with, I just have I have serious concerns about what that would mean if some communities or donors would be able to help some districts and others would be left behind. And what would that mean for the state as a whole?
I would just say, I mean, thank God for Chevron and Bill Cosby if he does it. I mean, we need that level of investment from public and civic partners. But Jonathan's right. I mean, so in the world of a single district or a single school, absolutely, you really have no choice except to do that. But it is not a system solution, and it's not durable over time. And if you think about what happens if the tax measure doesn't pass in November, and you have to make another $5 billion worth of cuts, you know, you're starting to hit even Mark Zuckerberg's capacity to help a local school district. I mean, there aren't enough Bill Cosbys and Chevrons to be able to make that, to even touch that kind of a hit. And so a real systemic solution is necessary. And the first priority, you know, has got to be to avert that level of just sort of mass destruction, and not just of education, right? I mean, you know, sometimes I think we live in our bubble in the education world and think, well, they just need to cut somewhere else, and they are. I mean, there's basically no money left to build affordable housing in California or to clean up the brownfield, so the kids that we're concerned about in tougher neighborhoods, they're being assaulted in every possible way, and so are their parents and grandparents. Even, you know, on the prison side, it's easy to say let's spend less money on prisons, and you say, well, to do that you'd have to sentence fewer people, and that would mean changing 3 strikes. And that's all great. Many of us could agree with that, but again, that's not unless you're on the street tomorrow with petitions to repeal 3 strikes and to lower, and you know, you're voting against politicians that raise sentences. You're not actually doing anything by You can go home and post a status update on your Facebook that I'm a moral person because I think we should spend less on corrections and more on education. That is not actually doing anything for education until, you know, just the belief alone is not self-executing. And so the tax measure, I think, has really got to be at least for the next several months, the number one solution is a big word for that, but it's got to be the number one priority. Otherwise, we're looking at Armageddon.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments, if you don't mind. First of all, thinking about taxes, so many of our taxes are regressive, and I'd really like to see us move towards more progressive taxing. It's always hardest on the hardest hit communities, so that's one thing I want to say. Community colleges and universities, I think one of the biggest problems that's happening right now for them is that they're no longer hiring. They don't have stable or long-term faculty anymore. So much is driven by adjunct faculty. So you're talking about culture of departments, culture of a community college. You're talking about adjunct faculty that may be there one semester but not the next. That all affects the quality of education that students get. And also those relationships which are key to learning. And if students have regular faculty there, it's beneficial. The faculty get to know the students and vice versa. So there are systemic problems everywhere. And the other thing is about, we know how children learn. We know what's best for children. We have great theory, and when it's put into practice, it's wonderful. We've seen it work. We know it works. We know that children have multiple intelligences, that we don't all learn the same way. Someone learning to be a carpenter is learning math, is learning artistry, is learning many things, but we separate out everything and we test the life out of children. And I would like us to look at more strength-based ways of working with schools and children and look at their strengths rather than always in a deficit model. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Well, I think we have the former Vice Chancellor of the Community College System of California to my right, so he ought to talk a little bit about that, and then I want to make a comment on that.
Well, I actually think it's a really interesting point. So, an accent on the former, because I used to think the same thing and about the community college faculty question, and then I realized the first comment I made about the different zodiac signs of how we perceive education policy and reform, that I was falling into that trap, because it is the case that the proportion of community college instruction that's delivered by adjuncts as opposed to full-time faculty has been increasing pretty steadily over the last 30 years. The completion rates, the rate of student success in transfer certificates, both academic and vocational, and in associate degrees, the needle has moved hardly at all. And in fact, if there's any correlation at all, it's actually it's the one I wouldn't have expected. That as the percentage of adjuncts has increased more markedly in the last couple of years, student success has actually inched up too. I would not mean to suggest in any way that that's causal, but I do think it's important. For me, it's a reminder that although I have the sort of stable of philosophies around some of these issues, that they don't always pan out as being the most important thing that's affecting the success of our students. And so I'm not sure if I had $1 more to spend on community colleges or another $1 billion, exactly whether that's the right approach. I do know it's not the panacea. Given the changes over time in both of those situations. What we are seeing in the community colleges, I think, is starting to learn some more lessons from our for-profit and proprietary competitors, like it or not. And for the most part, I don't. But although there's some bright lights out there, we are learning things about our students that we have taken for granted for a long time, about their ambition, their capacity, their desire to complete fast, their desire to complete with some amount of certainty, and the levels of debt and financial costs that they are willing to pay to achieve that, whereas we have often placed a higher value on come and explore and spend, if you spend 8 years with us, then that's cool. We want you to get the full educational experience, and that's great too. Just being here is winning. And that's not how the students actually see it. They're willing to say, no, I'm not going to come
to the community college. Instead, I will plunk down a whole bunch of money at a school that has a pretty low graduation rate, but it's going to, if I don't graduate, at least it'll be fast. I will know pretty quickly. So I don't know, that doesn't imply a specific set of policy solutions, but it does say, let's pay some attention to what our students are telling us in their behaviors and in the choices that they're making, in addition to sort of our long-standing policy platforms around how to improve the community colleges. The only other thing I'd say is about the regressive tax piece, because I think you're exactly right. That has happened over time. Prop 13 has definitely reinforced that. The Budget Project's done a lot of work on how regressive the property tax system has become as a result. Property taxes generally are not a regressive tax, but under Prop 13, they have become wildly so. The service tax that Mike talked about, designed properly, is one way to deal with that. That in several areas of the services side of our economy, which is the fast-growing part of our economy, we're buying more services and fewer and less goods. That is especially true the wealthier that you are. So if you're only taxing hairdressers and some other services, then it can be quite regressive. But designed properly, a service tax can be part of a solution around returning some level of progressivity to the California tax structure.
Yeah, the only thing I'd mention on community colleges is not directly at them, but so many students, I've studied this deeply, and don't know how hard it is at community colleges. So they think if they pass their high school exit exam and they meet the minimum graduation requirements for high school graduation, they're ready for the community college. And they're not. We have community colleges have about 70% statewide who are in remediation in a remedial course after they graduate from high school and enter the community college. The new Common Core standards and the linked assessments to them will tell parents and schools, I believe, as early as 6th grade, and maybe before, whether your student is on a path to be able to take and complete successfully a college credit course at a community college or four-year college in California. Right now, parents don't know this. They don't know. The first thing they know probably is their student went over and took a placement test at the local community college and got put in some remedial course, and primarily in mathematics, which I think we're going to be able to do better teaching with this Common Core. So I think the linkage will be different because the standards are college ready and the assessment will be college ready, and there won't be these mystery stories about it. And when you look at it statistically, it's very hard to change the college success in academic sense of a student after 8th grade. The prediction on where a student is in 8th grade is highly correlated, if you're low, that you won't really make it. And so the senior high is way too late often to bring this about to real college readiness.
I'd just like to add one thing about the regressive aspect of taxes. We do put out a lot of information on that, and I just want to debunk a myth that I think will be prevalent in advertisements that we'll be watching for the next 4 months or 5 months, which is around the governor's proposed tax initiative, which does have a 1/4 cent sales tax in it. It's down from a 1/2 cent sales tax in the initial proposal. That if I were the one who had designed the tax, I probably wouldn't have put that sales tax in there. But it is a very, very small marginal amount on income earners if you're looking at how that would impact quintiles of income earners across the board. We have charts that show this. And so I think you're going to hear a lot about how there's a regressive tax in the governor's measure. It is true, there is a 1/4 cent sales tax in there, but it is a very, very small amount of the overall amount of dollars that will be raised. And in fact, the tax that is on the highest income earners, $250,000 for an individual, not $500,000 for a married couple. You will not pay a cent of increased income taxes if you are not above those income thresholds. So it's important that we understand what it is that we're about to be presented with, and that's one of the things that you're going to be hearing a lot about.
Good afternoon. My name is Kyra Spinoza. I work with a community organization called Education, Excellence, and Equity. I wanted to just make a recommendation about a book by Tony Wagner. It's called Creating Innovators, and it's about this concept of how play, purpose, and passion needs to be, the core principles of teaching. But what goes hand in hand with that is this, the idea of assessments and tests. So just wanted to get more thoughts from you guys about how you feel, people can work together to really try to change the way that testing and assessment is done. Because like, other people have said, we already know the best practices out there. That's happening. But with schools that implement the out-of-box best practices, then they're still handcuffed because of how these tests are.
These Common Core standards were adopted by the states. Mathematics is heavily redone in terms of its sequencing and its understanding and its depth. And so we signed California to agree to implement the Common Core standards. Then the federal government provided $185 million each to two different national testing consortia to develop new assessments. $185 million is a lot of money to develop an assessment. And there's two of them that are doing it. We joined the one of them called Smarter Balanced. And I think that name speaks a little bit to your question about testing. Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, we're called. We are then signed a memorandum of understanding with Smarter Balanced that if they develop new assessments for us, we would administer those assessments in 2014-2015 school year. And so we actually signed up with Smarter Balanced with a rival called PARC because they were the more radical change in testing. We thought they were the most outside the box of the two systems we had, and they were the most distant from the multiple choice context we're using. So in answer, you're looking at qualitative things. Students will be asked to do performance assessments where it's sort of like the difference between being able to pass the driver's test by answering the questions, and then you get behind the wheel and the guy has you park, that's the performance test. And so we will definitely give performance assessments. In that, in fact, the Smarter Balanced in the state of California are committed to that. So there will be performance testing, much more what are called open response. Right now, our tests are closed. Pick one from the multiple choice so we can send them through machines and score them. And here, students will fill out answers, and have to actually think up responses on their own. So this is going to change, and I'm quite confident that, I don't know that 2014-15 the world will turn on its head, but we'll begin something that's quite new. And the testing technology we're using today of the multiple choice was developed in World War I when they got all these recruits and they didn't know whether to put them in baking bread or in the infantry or driving a truck or whatever, and so they gave them these multiple choice tests. And so it's derivative of that. We've stuck with it basically and refined it over all those periods. So there'll still be some multiple choice, but I have confidence that we're on the road to change there, and we're deeply committed to it. And assessment doesn't cost that much money. It's actually training the teachers to be able to deliver it and providing them with the instructional materials and the classroom conditions that they can teach it. That's cost you a heck of a lot of money, but we can build these assessments at fairly low prices.
You asked what you could do, or what we could do about this, and this is, I think, this is a moment in history to do that, right? So, and because this consortium is doing the work, and they're looking for feedback about what the items look like, how the tests are done, what is measured, and in which ways. And so, to some extent, they're calling all of our bluff, because almost all of us have been saying this in some way or another. Oh, it doesn't measure this, or we know students need to know this, or students should know that. They're saying, okay, you think we should be measuring multiple intelligences? Give me some examples of performance assessments that would do that. Give me some item bank things for an assessment. So it's now on us, as practitioners, as community leaders, as businesses who are engaged in work-based learning assessment, to start producing. And one way to track that is to go to the state department, the California Department of Education website, sign up for the newsletters and updates for the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, so you can start to figure out where might be opportune places to get engaged. But we're beyond now the point of we need to do assessment differently, and we need to measure other things. That debate is won. Now it's how, and the time frame is fast, and it's immediate, and it's on a very strict set of milestones. So sign up and start getting engaged in that and contributing to what the new system looks like.
Yeah, and every local school board will have to be discussing this because it's going to be quite a change for them. So I think the school boards will be very interesting places to work on this.
Let's give our panel a round of applause. Jonathan Kaplan, they've provided us with a really provocative look at some of the state issues, and I mean provocative because I could have argued a few of the points that they were making, but I won't, as a former community college president. But I just want you to know that I think that what this conversation has done is really piqued our interest, and hopefully as we progress in some of our more serious conversations continuing about this topic, that we take heed to some of the things that they've said. So let's give them another round of applause. Next, you're going to move into the concurrent sessions, and once again, they're going to be located in the same rooms off to the right. I believe we have Moving the Goal, and that panel is going to be convened by Joel Mackey, The Promise of Public Education, presented by Derek Mitchell, Gateways, Cradle to Career Workforce Partnerships, presented by Emily Bresendine, and Link Learning Pathways, presented by Dave Yanakowski. So go to your breakout sessions, learn all you can, and come back for our last plenary session. Thank you very much.